Richard, so you've done the walk.
Mm.
Were you already a trustee of Racing Welfare, or have they taken you in as
No, I
a
wasn't. That followed. They asked me to become a trustee, having finished it, which I was thrilled to do. I'm still a trustee, so I do a 9-year stretch as a trustee. I think I've got 2 to go.
So this was a decade ago. You did the.
2016, I finished the walk.
Okay, so I mean, what does that entail? Obviously, keeping your eye on the money, I suppose, and seeing what the.
Yeah, it's not that time consuming. It's helping bring a degree of experience about financial markets to the finance committee and fundraising to the fundraising committee. I love it. It's a charity that I am incredibly passionate about because it does make an enormous difference to a considerable number of people's lives. It has grown significantly in public awareness terms. I mean, I certainly remember when I was doing walking the courses. So I went round a paddock and just leaned over the rail and asked people what they knew about the Injured Jockeys Fund. Everybody knew about the Injured Jockeys Fund who went racing. Absolutely everybody. You say, what do you know about racing welfare? Honestly, I think 90% of people either had never heard of it or thought it looked after horses rather than human beings. And so it's also been a lot about raising public awareness, and the fund. I think the charity has been incredibly fortunate to hire Dawn Goodfellow as chief exec many years ago. Well, I say many years ago. It was actually funny enough. It was when I was walking. When she became chief executive, I rang her up and said, I've currently got quite a decent platform to talk about racing welfare because most race courses I go to, I'll do an interview with whoever the race day presenter is about racing. Is there a particular message that you as the incoming CEO want me to talk about? And Dawn said, well, it would be great to meet up. And I said, well, listen, when I'm next back in, not walking. She said, no, I've got a much better idea. Why don't I come and walk with you for a day? I thought, I like that. This is clearly a doer. So Dawn came and walked with me between Doncaster and Pontefract. And she's been an absolute inspiration and an incredible driving force behind that charity, and has made, has a great team of people. And I have the utmost respect for the charity and the people who work for it.
I'm assuming you raised the bar somewhat with your contribution after the walking.
Well, I think it helped. £250,000 helps most charities, and it did make a difference. If we could find someone every year who could raise £250,000 for racing welfare, I think racing welfare would be extremely happy.
And it's not just racing welfare. It's tell us about Iggy's fund. It's about Capit FUN with a D.
Yes, Iggy's fund is a very recently established charity that was set up by the brother and friends of a really phenomenally wonderful man called Alan Eggleston, who was a professional cricketer. He played cricket for Kent. I think he won 7 Test caps for England. Fast bowler, real character. And after he retired from the game with a back injury, he developed a brain tumour and lived with this inoperable brain tumour for north of 20 years. And I met him on a charity golf day somewhere. He was our sort of sporting celeb with the 3 of us who turned up, and we played at a course down in Kent. We played for about 20 minutes, and then the heavens opened and there was no more play, and we sat in the clubhouse all day, and he just became a great mate. So I've been involved with his golf. He had a golf day for years and years and years to raise money for the Brain Tumour Society, and sadly he died a couple of years ago. And Iggy's fund, which is set up to effectively do a whole range of things, from raise money for brain tumour research, support the families of people with brain tumours, to support young people get into and enjoy sport where they are financially challenged to a point where actually being involved, getting to matches, kit, all that sort of stuff. It's a brilliant charity, and you know, Iggy was an absolutely inspirational character, as someone who was dealt an unbelievably bad set of cards, lousy hand of cards, and really made the most of it. Incredible humour, incredibly stoic, unbelievably brave. I mean, just a wonderful man. I loved him to bits. And yeah, so that when this charity was set up, they asked me to become a trustee. I was thrilled to do so.
Okay, now you've left the city now, and you work full time in racing as an advisor to trainers.
Yeah, when I having got back to the sort of desk day job after walking the courses, you know, having spent 13 months walking the fat end of 3,000 miles around the country at 3.5 miles an hour and seeing what an unbelievably wonderful country we live in, to go back to sitting in front of 8 Bloomberg screens for 10 hours a day in an office in the middle of central London was, it had lost any possible shine that to keep me there. So yeah, so I jacked that in, and the first business I got involved with, which I'm still involved in to a small extent, is a business called the Racing Manager, which is a communications platform for trainers and owners and syndicates to effectively try to give owners a more interesting and engaging experience, supplying them with loads of information about their horses, whether it's entries and decks with time-form race cards attached, whether it's, you know, giving the trainers an app which enables them to update with voice notes and PDFs and videos and photographs, or form alerts where, you know, your horse runs in a race and finishes in the first 4. We'll tell you every time the other 3 that finish in the 4. It's a mass of stuff that we send, which makes the ownership experience more enjoyable and engaging, and it also saves a good deal of time for trainers and their staff, because rather than sending out, you know, a series of emails saying your horse has been entered to run in this race or that race or that race, we do it all for them, which releases time. So
Is this something that you came up with yourself, or
no,
is it something you got involved with?
I got involved with it. It had been, they'd been building it for a little while, and they'd got to a point where they wanted to go out and talk to you know, trainers and owners and syndicate managers and so on about it, and one of their shareholders suggested that it might be worth talking to me about whether I could help them, because having spent 18 months on walking the courses, I'd got to know an awful lot of people reasonably well in racing, and so I worked with them and I still do, and it's a brilliant platform. It's inexpensive, and it enhances the experience for owners, as I say. So I still do that, and more recently, over the past couple of years, I've been working with a couple of trainers, essentially on the basis that, in my experience, the vast majority of trainers are, what they really want to do is look after horses, train horses, get horses to win races. They're typically not, in my experience, and this is by no means a broad brush statement, but there are plenty within racing who would view themselves as horsemen rather than businessmen or women. And I felt that with my sort of background and experience and understanding of the business world, that I may well be able to add value to their businesses, whether their issue was getting a message out into the wider racing world about, you know, what they do and how they do it and how they train their horses. I mean, a great example would be, you know, when we set up this business in the city, we made our fund managers sit down and write down on paper how they ran their money and why they ran their money that way. Where was the evidence to support that? And the thinking behind that was entirely that, you know, no approach works all the time, in exactly the same way that no trainer has a great year every year, because, you know, I mean, it just happens that you go through a lean spell. You know, horses aren't well, bad haylage, just not a great set of horses. It happens. But if your owners have bought into you effectively by dint of understanding what you do and how you train horses, and they bought a process rather than simply, you know, a track record, they're much more likely, I think, to stick with you when you have an average year or a below average year. So, you know, and different trainers have different issues. But, you know, if you think about a training yard with, say, 50 horses and 25 full-time staff. If you take that sort of business in terms of scale, in terms of number of people and the amount of money they're turning over, and you put that in the real world, a business like that would have someone working on HR, it would have someone working in a sales and marketing capacity, it might have someone working in a PR. I mean, it's a broader based business than simply a trainer and a secretary. And I felt that there were potentially a lot of trainers out there who might benefit from having someone to come in and just help. And the first trainers I worked for and still do, and I absolutely love it, are Dan and Claire Kubler, who I have the utmost respect for. They're two extremely intelligent people. Dan's got a degree in equine science from Cirencester. Claire's a Cambridge University graduate, was a forensic accountant for PwC. They are extremely able people. They have a brilliant process for training horses. I think they would admit, and I'm not ashamed to say this, that their weakness is getting out there and actually asking people to send them horses and grow their ownership base. And I think that's something they've found difficult. And so I've worked with them, as I say, for a couple of years in essentially getting the message out of, what are they about? What is it about Kubler Racing that means you should send them a horse? And their method is, I think, now pretty proven. They've taken horses from other people's yards, like Astro King, for example, who they bought at the horse in training sale for 36,000 guineas. I mean, in the context of buying horses these days, that's buttons. For a horse that was then rated 99, who finished second in consecutive Hunt Cups for Sir Michael Stout. They took him back to Sarson Farm, and in his first season there, he's won a Heritage Handicap at the Ebor meeting. He was touched off in the John Smith's Cup by the width of a fag paper. He won the Cambridgeshire off top weight, which no horse had done in 134 years, and finished incredibly unlucky 6th in the International Trophy at Bahrain last week. And it's not just with him they've done it. They did it with a horse called Anderleep, who they got rated 65 in June last year. He's won 6 races, and they got him to 94. Percy's Lad. They are a tremendously good team, and they've got a great team of horsemen behind them. So I work with them, and I work with Warren Greatrex on the same basis. Warren is one of the very few trainers who's trained 4 Grade 1 winners in the UK and Ireland. There really aren't very many of them about. By his own admission, he went through a pretty lean spell when horses weren't healthy, and he was in what I think is widely acknowledged to be a pretty unhealthy yard. And then he had the nightmare of dealing with, he lost a couple of lads to suicide for reasons that had nothing whatsoever to do with the yard. But as someone who felt, a bit like I think as many trainers do, a bit of a father figure to his staff, it hit Warren terribly hard. And so I've been working with Warren on partly just helping to sort of build the confidence level and try to get more horses in the yard and try to get people into the yard to see what. And he's now in Oliver Sherwood's old yard. It was bought by a guy called Jim Bryce, and they have spent. He spent a lot of money on it, and it has the finest facilities of any training yard I've ever been in. And Warren's humming now. He had a great year, best year for 5 years last year, culminating with Bill Baxter winning the Topham. He's got a wonderful group of young horses, and I think he's very much on the up. So essentially what I'm trying to do is to help them in areas where they are not strong. What they really want to be doing is just training horses. Warren wants to be riding Bill Baxter out, not sitting in the office worrying about, where the owner's coming from or how he's going to syndicate this horse or whatever it may be. So, yeah, that's what I do.
Okay, Richard, and finally, a bit more about you. The 792nd Point of Light Award from Theresa May when she was the Prime Minister. Can you briefly tell us what that was?
Yeah, that was a bit of a shock. I must confess, I had never heard of the Point of Light Award when I got it. It's the Point of Light Award. Actually, I think was set up by George Bush Senior in the States, and it effectively recognises volunteers who've done something a bit, whether it's nuts or just rather wonderful to help. And nominations go in. And I think the UK took it up in about 2014. And yeah, I was the 792nd recipient of this award, and this letter from Downing Street came through the door, which was a bit of a shock to the system.
They've done 200, well, say 3,000 miles for sake of argument. Is there another challenge in you, or is that enough?
Yeah, I mean, inevitably a few wags suggested, what am I going to do next? Do it in Ireland or do it in France or wherever? I'm definitely not doing that. The answer is there isn't really, but you know, there are projects that Racing Welfare are working on every year, fundraising events, and one of the things that they've got penciled in for September next year is to do a charity walk along the Jurassic Coast. And not surprisingly, they sort of targeted me as a pretty obvious person to front that for them. So yeah, I suspect the trainers might be coming out again for that, but it's not going to be anywhere near 2,910 miles. That I can promise you.
Brilliant. So on that note, Richard Farquhar, thank you very much.
Pleasure.